Lonely prince buys obese 19-year-old at auction, marries her that same day. The dusty market square falls silent as a desperate father leads his daughter to the block. Laughter cuts the air, mockery, cruelty, shame. But then, a noble steps forward, cloaked in silence, and does the unthinkable. He buys her not as a servant, but as his bride. That very day, in a chapel where whispers sting like knives, vows are spoken that shake an entire kingdom. But the story does not end with a kiss. Behind castle doors, enemies sharpen their daggers. Courtly mothers sneer, powerful rivals plot, and even the law itself threatens to tear them apart. And yet, this young woman, once mocked, once unwanted, may hold the power to change everything. If her heart can endure the storm, will their love survive a world built to break them? Or will the crown itself demand their undoing? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more of the frost-kissed morning air nipped at Clara's cheeks as she stood in the village square of Rothenburg. Dawn's pale light crept over the steep-pitched roofs, casting long shadows across worn cobblestones. Market day usually brought the scent of fresh bread and the cheerful bustle of traders, but today felt different. Today, Clara's heart beat like a frightened bird against her ribs. Her father's calloused hand gripped her arm, gentle but firm, as he guided her toward the wooden platform where livestock and goods were typically sold. Tears threatened to spill from his eyes, but he blinked them away. "Forgive me, my girl," he whispered, his voice rough with shame. "The debts. We have no choice." Clara lifted her chin, though her lower lip trembled. At 19, she had always known her plain looks and sturdy figure made her different from the willowy village girls. But she had never imagined she would end up here, to be sold like a cow at market. The morning crowd gathered, their breaths making clouds in the cold air. Farmers paused their work. Market women set down their baskets, and even a few fine carriages stopped to watch. The auctioneer, a thin man with a wheedling voice, seized Clara's arm and yanked her onto the platform. "Good folk of Rothenburg," he called out, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "What do we have here?" A fine, strong girl, built for work. He circled Clara like a vulture. Though perhaps too fine. Been eating well, this one? Laughter rippled through the crowd. Clara's cheeks burned, but she kept her eyes forward, focusing on the church spire in the distance. A group of nobles, passing through the square in their fine clothes, paused to watch with sneering amusement. "Come now," the auctioneer continued, giving Clara's arm a shake. "Who will start the bidding? She may be plump as a partridge, but think of the work those strong arms could do." More laughter, crueler now. Clara saw her father's shoulders slump further with each jeer. No hands raised, no voices called out offers. "Please." Her father stepped forward, his weathered face lined with desperation. "The harvest failed twice. We need only enough to pay the tax collector. She's a good girl, hardworking, kind. Doesn't fill coffers," someone shouted, triggering another wave of mockery. At that moment, a black carriage that had been stopped at the edge of the square's crowd drew closer. Its occupant, wrapped in a dark cloak, stepped down. He moved through the parting crowd like a shadow, his face hidden beneath a deep hood. The auctioneer's voice grew uncertain. "Do I hear any bids? Any at all?" Silence fell. Clara's throat tightened. With humiliation, even as property, she was worthless. 2,000 crowns. The voice rang out clear and commanding. The crowd gasped as one. The cloaked figure stepped forward, and when he pushed back his hood, the gasps turned to shocked whispers. Prince Wilhelm of Altenburg stood before them, his features noble but kind, his eyes fixed not on the gawking crowd, but on Clara. She had heard tales of the lonely prince who avoided his mother's court, but nothing had prepared her for the gentleness in his gaze. "Your Highness," the auctioneer stammered, dropping into a clumsy bow. We are honored. The money will be paid immediately," Wilhelm interrupted, his voice carrying across the nigh-silent square. He climbed the steps to the platform with fluid grace, standing before Clara. Though he spoke softly, his words reached every straining ear. "But I do not purchase you as property, my lady." Clara's heart stopped. "My lady," no one had ever addressed her so. Wilhelm turned to face the crowd, his presence commanding complete attention. "Father Matthias," he called out, and the village priest emerged from the stunned onlookers. "Your services are required." The priest hurried forward, his plain brown robes swishing against the wooden steps. "Your Highness, I require you to marry," U.S. Wilhelm announced. "Here, now." The silence shattered. Gasps and exclamations erupted from every corner of the square. The nobles who had been sneering moments before now looked as though they had swallowed something sour. Clara's father stumbled backward, catching himself against a market stall. Clara herself could barely breathe. "My lord," she whispered. "Surely you cannot mean—" Wilhelm took her hand, his touch warm and steady. "I have watched this world of painted smiles and hollow hearts for too long," he said, his voice meant only for her. "In you, I see something real, something true." His eyes held hers. "If you will have me?" Father Matthias cleared his throat, clutching his prayer book to his chest. "Your Highness, the banns, the proper procedures, ... Are you refusing to marry us, Father?" Wilhelm's tone was gentle but firm. The priest glanced between them, then at the watching crowd, then back to Wilhelm's unwavering gaze. "No, Your Highness. If the lady consents." All eyes turned to Clara, standing there in her simple wool dress, cheeks still burning from the earlier mockery. She looked into the face of a prince who saw past her plain exterior to something worthy within. The chapel bells of St. Maria's tolled 12 times, their clear peals echoing across the village square. Word of the morning's extraordinary events had raced through Rothenburg faster than autumn leaves in a whirlwind. Villagers pressed against the chapel doors, their faces a mix of wonder and disbelief. Kitchen maids stood beside merchants' wives, farmers alongside craftsmen, all social barriers temporarily forgotten in the face of such an unprecedented occasion. Inside the cool stone walls, sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting jewel-toned patterns across the worn flagstones. Carved wooden pews that had witnessed generations of simple village weddings now held an altogether different gathering. At the back, common folk craned their necks for a better view. Near the front, a handful of traveling nobles sat stiff-backed and scowling, their fine clothes a sharp contrast to the homespun wool of the villagers. Prince Wilhelm stood before the altar, his dark cloak discarded to reveal elegant attire that somehow avoided ostentation. He reached into his coat and produced a folded document bearing an official seal, presenting it to Father Matthias with quiet authority. "A special marriage license, Father," Wilhelm explained, his voice carrying in the hushed chapel. "Obtained in Munich last month. It dispenses with a requirement for banns." The priest's hands trembled slightly as he examined the document. He glanced from the paper to the prince, then to Clara, who stood to the side with her father. Her simple brown dress, though clean and well-mended, seemed suddenly inadequate for such an occasion. "Everything appears to be in order, Your Highness," Father Matthias confirmed. Though his voice held a note of lingering amazement, a noblewoman near the front whispered loudly enough to be heard, "Bought like cattle and married the same day." How utterly barbaric! Clara's cheeks flushed, but before shame could take root, Wilhelm crossed to her side. He took her hand with such natural grace and warmth that she forgot to be embarrassed by her rough, work-worn fingers against his smooth ones. "My lady," he said softly, leading her toward the altar. "Shall we?" The way he spoke to her, not as a prince to a peasant, not as master to servant, but as one heart to another, made Clara's breath catch. No one had ever treated her with such dignity. Father Matthias cleared his throat and opened his prayer book. The familiar Latin prayers filled the chapel, but Clara hardly heard them. She was lost in Wilhelm's eyes, which never left her face. They held no mockery, no calculation, only a gentle warmth that made her feel, for the first time in her life, truly seen. The rings, Your Highness. Father Matthias prompted. Wilhelm produced 2 simple gold bands. Later, Clara would learn they had belonged to his beloved grandmother, the last truly happy marriage he had witnessed at court. But in that moment, all she knew was the tender way he slipped the ring onto her finger. I, Wilhelm, take thee, Clara. His voice was clear and firm, brooking no doubt about his intentions. When it was her turn, Clara's voice shook only slightly as she repeated the ancient words. I, Clara, take thee, Wilhelm... More whispers rustled through the chapel. A nobleman near the front muttered something about royal blood being polluted. But Wilhelm's hand tightened reassuringly around hers, and suddenly the whispers didn't matter. You may kiss your bride, Father Matthias announced, making the sign of the cross. Wilhelm's kiss was gentle, respectful, yet held a warmth that sent a shiver down Clara's spine. When they turned to face the gathering, she saw tears in her father's eyes, not of shame now, but of wonder. The afternoon passed in a blur of congratulations from villagers and cold stares from nobles. As dusk painted the sky in deep purples and blues, Wilhelm led Clara to the village inn. The innkeeper, still flustered by his royal guest, showed them to the best room before bringing up a simple but hearty meal of roast chicken, fresh bread, and autumn vegetables, alone at last, seated across a small table from her new husband. Clara's hands trembled as she reached for her cup. The events of the day felt like a dream, or perhaps a cruel jest that would shatter at any moment. Wilhelm noticed her trembling and gently covered her hand with his. You need not fear me, Clara, he said softly. I know this day has been overwhelming. She dared to meet his eyes. Why did you do it, Your Highness? Surely you could have simply paid my father's debts without making you my wife? His smile was sad but genuine. I have spent my life surrounded by people who wear beauty like a mask, hiding empty hearts beneath. Today, I saw real beauty in your dignity, despite cruelty, in your quiet strength. I saw a truth that has nothing to do with titles or wealth. He squeezed her hand gently. And please, when we are alone, I am simply Wilhelm. Clara looked down at their joined hands, his pale and smooth, hers tanned and calloused. Yet, somehow, they fit. I keep thinking I'll wake up, she whispered, that this will all prove to be some elaborate joke at my expense. No joke, Wilhelm assured her. No cruel jest. Only truth, and a new beginning for both of us, if you'll have it. The autumn sun peeked over distant hills, painting the morning sky in shades of pink and gold. Clara sat in the prince's carriage, her ruff spun traveling cloak pulled tight around her shoulders as she watched her village grow smaller through the window. The familiar church spire, the market square, where just yesterday her life had changed forever. The crooked chimney of her childhood home. All slowly faded into the misty distance. The carriage interior was more luxurious than anything Clara had ever seen. Plush velvet cushions in deep burgundy lined the seats, and polished wooden panels gleamed in the early light. Yet she perched awkwardly at the edge of her seat, acutely aware of how much space her plump figure occupied in the confined space. Wilhelm noticed her discomfort. Please, make yourself comfortable, he said gently. The journey to Altenburg takes 3 days. 3 days. Clara's eyes widened. She had never traveled more than 10 miles from her village. "We'll stop at post houses to change horses," Wilhelm explained, "and stay at inns along the way. The roads can be rough, but the carriage is well sprung." If to prove his point, they hit a rut that made the carriage lurch. Clara grabbed the window frame to steady herself, and Wilhelm smiled. "You'll get used to it," he assured her. Their first stop came mid-morning at a post house, where fresh horses waited. Clara watched in fascination as stable boys efficiently unharnessed the tired team and hitched up new ones. The postmaster emerged to greet them, bowing deeply to Wilhelm, but eyeing Clara with poorly concealed curiosity. She heard him whisper to his wife, the prince's new bride, and her, a farmer's daughter. The pattern repeated throughout the day. At each stop, word of their identity seemed to arrive before them, and Clara endured countless stares and whispered comments about her common origins and fuller figure. Yet Wilhelm's quiet presence beside her helped her hold her head high. As afternoon shadows lengthened, they stopped at an inn for the night. The innkeeper's wife curtsied so low she nearly toppled over, then showed them to the best room. Once they were alone, Wilhelm sank into a chair by the window. "I apologize for the stares and whispers," he said softly. "I've grown used to them myself, but I hate subjecting you to such scrutiny." Clara sat carefully in the chair opposite him. "You receive such treatment too, of a different kind." He gazed out at the darkening sky. "They call me the Lonely Prince, you know. I've never quite fit their mold of what a prince should be. The endless balls, the political maneuvering, the shallow conversations about fashion and gossip. ... Double quotes, he shook his head. "I've always longed for something real." The next day brought more travel, more curious stares at post houses, more whispered comments about the unlikely pair. But in the privacy of the carriage, Wilhelm continued to open up to Clara. He spoke of his mother's cold disapproval, of growing up surrounded by courtiers who smiled to his face while plotting behind his back, of his deep desire to make real changes in his people's lives. "The court sees only titles and appearances," he said bitterly. "They measure worth by the cut of one's coat or the size of one's estate. I've watched them destroy good people with their cruel judgments and petty rules." Clara twisted her hands in her lap. "Then perhaps they are right to whisper. How can someone like me, plain, plump, common-born, ever hope to be a proper?" Princess Wilhelm reached across the carriage to take her hand. "Do you know what I see when I look at you? I see kindness in how you thanked every stable boy and serving maid. I see dignity in how you hold yourself despite their stares. I see wisdom in your questions about the villages we pass." His grip tightened. "True nobility lies not in appearance, but in spirit. Clara, you have more genuine nobility than half the painted peacocks at court." The third day of travel brought them into the heart of Altenburg's territories. The countryside grew more prosperous, the villages larger and better maintained. As evening approached, Clara noticed Wilhelm growing tenser, his jaw tight as he gazed out the window. Then, as the sun began to set, she saw it. Altenburg Castle rose from a hill ahead of them, its pale stone towers glowing golden in the last light. It was larger than she had imagined, and sprawling complex of buildings and courtyards surrounded by high walls. Beautiful, but somehow forbidding. Clara's heart began to pound. Behind those walls waited Wilhelm's mother, the dowager princess, and all the noble courtiers with their elegant manners and sharp tongues. How would they receive a farmer's daughter who could barely curtsy? What cruel games might they play with a common-born princess who knew nothing of their ways? The carriage rolled steadily onward as shadows lengthened across the land. With each turn of the wheels, the castle loomed larger, and Clara's dread grew stronger. She clutched her rough-spun cloak tighter, suddenly very aware of its coarse weave and faded color. Wilhelm reached over and took her trembling hand. "Remember," he said softly, "true nobility lies within." But as the massive castle gates swung open to admit them, Clara couldn't help wondering if inner nobility would be enough to survive what awaited her in this glittering, dangerous new world. The iron gates of Altenburg Castle groaned open as the prince's carriage approached. Ancient stone towers stretched toward the autumn sky, their weathered faces telling tales of centuries past. Cards in gleaming breastplates stood at attention, while servants in crisp livery lined the courtyard, bowing low as the carriage drew to a halt. Clara's heart thundered in her chest as Wilhelm stepped down first. Turning to offer his hand, she hesitated for just a moment before placing her trembling fingers in his steady grip. As she descended, her new silk dress, hastily purchased during their journey, rustled against the carriage step. The whispers began immediately. Noble ladies in elaborate gowns stood on the castle steps, hiding sneers behind jeweled fans. There, eyes raked over Clara's plump figure with undisguised disdain. The auction bride, one woman murmured, loud enough to be heard, bought like a cow at market. Wilhelm's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure, guiding Clara forward with a gentle hand at her back. The great hall doors swung wide, revealing a vast chamber with soaring ceilings and tapestry-covered walls. 100 faces turned to stare as the herald's voice rang out. His Highness, Prince Wilhelm of Altenburg, and ... There was the slightest pause. Her Highness Princess Clara of Altenburg. The assembled courtiers bowed and curtsied, though their movements were stiff with reluctance. Clara tried to hold her head high as Wilhelm led her through the crowd, but each whispered comment struck like a physical blow. A farmer's daughter. What scandal. She never fit in here. At the far end of the hall stood an elegant woman in black silk, her silver hair arranged perfectly beneath a widow's cap. The Dowager Duchess Hedwig's face might have been carved from marble for all the warmth it showed. Wilhelm bowed slightly. "Mother, may I present my wife, Princess Clara?" Clara dropped into her deepest curtsy, though her knees shook with nervousness. "Your Grace, I am honored too," but the Dowager had already turned away, her skirts swishing against the marble floor as she swept from the hall. The message was clear. Clara was beneath notice. A painful silence fell. Then the whispers resumed. Louder now, emboldened by the Dowager's rejection. Clara felt tears threatening, but forced them back. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry, as servants began directing the luggage to their chambers. Clara noticed how they scurried about with downcast eyes, clearly expecting harsh treatment. When a young maid nearly stumbled. Under the weight of a trunk, Clara stepped forward instinctively. "Please, let me help you with that," she said, steadying both girl and trunk. The maid's eyes widened in shock. "Oh no, Your Highness. I couldn't possibly thank you for your care with our belongings," Clara said warmly. "What is your name?" "Marie, Your Highness." The girl bobbed a curtsy, pink-cheeked with surprise at being addressed so kindly. Throughout the afternoon, as Clara was shown to her chambers and helped to settle in, she made sure to thank each servant by name. Their startled looks slowly gave way to cautious smiles. Even the stern-faced housekeeper unbent enough to explain the castle's daily routines without her initial frost Inés. When night fell, Clara found herself alone in her vast new bedchamber. Candles flickered in silver holders, casting dancing shadows on the silk-papered walls. She knelt beside her bed, hands clasped tight. "Dear Lord," she whispered, "grant me strength to face whatever comes. Help me prove my worth, not through birth or beauty, but through kindness." And a soft knock interrupted her prayer. The door creaked open, revealing Marie, the young maid from earlier. "Begging your pardon, Your Highness," Marie said softly, slipping inside. "I wanted to thank you. No one has ever treated us with such gentleness before." She twisted her apron in nervous hands. "The other servants, they say you're different, in a good way. I just thought you should know you have friends here, even if the nobles. She trailed off, ducking her head. Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest, the first real warmth since arriving at the castle. "Thank you, Marie," she said softly. "That means more to me than you know." A kitchen's warmth, dawn's first light, crept through the castle kitchen windows, carrying with it the comforting aroma of fresh-baked bread. The enormous kitchen buzzed with activity as servants scurried about their morning duties. Pots clanked. Fires crackled, and the head cook barked orders in a voice that brooked no argument. Into this controlled chaos stepped Clara, still wearing her simple dress from the village. The kitchen fell silent. Servants froze mid-task, staring at the new princess who had no business being in their domain. The head cook, a round-faced woman named Frau Gerda, nearly dropped her wooden spoon. "Your Highness?" Frau Gerda curtsied. Awkwardly. "This is no place for please," Clara said softly. "I know my way around the kitchen. May I help?" Before anyone could protest, Clara rolled up her sleeves and plunged her hands into a bowl of bread dough. Her fingers remembered the familiar motions, kneading, folding, shaping the soft mass with practiced ease. "But Your Highness, your hands, .. Frau Gerda sputtered, horrified at the sight of a princess covered in flour. "Are made for working, just like yours," Clara finished with a gentle smile. The tension in the kitchen began to thaw, like ice melting in spring sunshine. A cry of pain pierced the air. A young scullery maid had sliced her palm while chopping vegetables. Blood dripped onto the stone floor as the girl tried to hide her injury, terrified of losing her position. Without hesitation, Clara crossed the kitchen. "Let me see," she said, taking the girl's trembling hand in hers. The cut was deep but clean. Clara reached for her apron, not silk or satin, but sturdy. Katanand tore a strip from it. "Your apron, Your Highness." Someone gasped. "Is doing what it should, being useful?" Clara cleaned the wound with water and bound it carefully, her touch gentle but sure. "There now, rest this hand today. The vegetables can wait." The scullery maid's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "Thank you, Your Highness." Word of Clara's actions spread through the castle like wildfire. Servants whispered in corridors and exchanged glances in the great hall. The auction bride had helped in the kitchen, had torn her own apron to bandage a servant's wound. She had spoken to them as equals, not subjects. Prince Wilhelm found Clara later that morning, her cheeks still flushed from the kitchen's warmth. "I hear you've caused quite a stir below stairs," he said, his eyes twinkling. Clara's heart sank. "I've disappointed you." On the contrary, Wilhelm took her flour-dusted hands in his. "You've shown more true nobility in one morning than most of the court manages in a lifetime." His words kindled a spark of courage in Clara's heart. Perhaps she wasn't as out of place as she'd feared, but not everyone viewed Clara's actions with approval. In his private chambers, Count Reinhard von Falkenhayn pored over dusty legal tomes by candlelight, his sharp features twisted in concentration. The marriage of a prince to a peasant bought at auction, surely there was some law, some ancient decree that would render it void. His quill scratched across parchment as he made notes, plotting the downfall of the auction bride who dared rise above her station as evening settled over the castle. Wilhelm and Clara sat before the crackling fire in their private chambers. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls as Wilhelm recounted a childhood mishap, involving a stolen pie and a very angry cook. For the first time since arriving at Altenburg, Clara laughed, a genuine warm sound that filled the room like music. Wilhelm found himself laughing too, captivated by the way firelight caught the amber highlights in her hair. In that moment, something shifted between them. The awkwardness of their arranged union softened, revealing glimpses of what might grow into something deeper. They talked late into the night, sharing stories of their lives before fate had brought them together. With each tale, each shared smile, The distance between prince and peasant narrowed just a little more. The torches flickered like earthbound stars across the village green, their warm light dancing on faces both noble and common. The annual harvest festival had drawn everyone from miles around, filling the air with a mingled sense of roasted meats, fresh bread, and sweet autumn apples. Musicians played cheerful tunes while children darted between the legs of merry-making adults. Clara walked beside Wilhelm, her head held high despite her simple dress of deep blue wool. Though lacking the silk and jewels that adorned the other noble ladies, she carried herself with quiet dignity. Her kind heart showed in her eyes and gentle smile, a beauty that outshone any finery. "Look at her," whispered Lady Rothschild behind her fan, still dressed like a farmer's daughter. Her companions tittered, their jeweled fingers pointing discreetly. But, for every sneer from the nobility, Clara received twice as many warm greetings from the villagers. "God bless you, my lady," called out old Martha, the herb woman Clara had tended during a fever. "Thank you for the warm blankets, Your Highness," added Thomas the carpenter, whose children now slept soundly thanks to her gift. Wilhelm squeezed her hand, pride evident in his bearing. "They see your true worth, my love," he murmured when the time came for the traditional harvest address. Wilhelm stepped forward. Instead of speaking himself, he turned to Clara. "My wife would honor us with her words," he announced, his voice carrying across the green. A hush fell over the crowd. Clara's heart thundered in her chest as she faced the sea of faces. Nobles stood with arched eyebrows, while villagers watched hopefully. Drawing a deep breath, she began to speak. "My friends," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Tonight, we celebrate not just the harvest, but the hands that brought it forth. From the humblest field hand to the most learned farmer, from the mill workers to the bakers, each person's labor feeds us all." She paused, meeting the eyes of both peasant and noble. "I have known both worlds now, the simplicity of honest work and the privileges of noble life. And I tell you truly, dignity lives in both places." The villagers nodded, some wiping tears from their eyes. Even some of the nobles shifted uncomfortably, touched by her words. "We are all God's children," Clara continued, her voice growing stronger. "When we show compassion to one another, when we recognize the worth in every person, we honor His creation. Let us celebrate not just the fruits of the earth, but the bonds between us all." A moment of silence followed her words. Then old Martha began to clap, followed by the carpenter and his family. Soon the entire village green thundered with applause. Even Lady Rothschild brought her hands together, her face softened with something like respect. Wilhelm beamed at his wife, drawing her close as the celebration resumed. For the first time since their marriage, Clara felt truly accepted. Villagers approached to share their stories and thanks. A few noble ladies, perhaps shamed by their earlier behavior, offered hesitant compliments. The night grew magical as dancers whirled beneath the torchlight. Fireworks burst overhead, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Clara leaned against Wilhelm's shoulder, happiness warming her heart like summer sunshine. But their moment of triumph was short-lived. As the last sparks faded from the sky, a rider appeared at the edge of the green. His boots were caked with mud, his horse lathered from hard riding. He carried a sealed message bearing the imperial crest. Wilhelm's face darkened as he read the contents. "Count Falkenhayn has petitioned the imperial court," he said quietly to Clara. "He claims our marriage is void under imperial law." Clara's hand flew to her throat, her brief taste of acceptance turning bitter. The Count's shadowy threat, which had lurked at the edges of their happiness, had finally taken shape. The parchment trembled in Wilhelm's hands as torchlight cast long shadows across the village green. The morning sun cast long shadows through the castle windows. As servants hurried through corridors, their whispers echoing off stone walls, news of the Count's petition spread like wildfire through Altenburg Castle, leaving worry and speculation in its wake. Clara sat at her window, watching the last festival banners being taken down in the courtyard below. The joy of yesterday evening felt distant now, replaced by a gnawing fear in her stomach. Around her, she could hear the not-so-subtle murmurs of passing nobles, their words sharp as daggers. Did you hear? The Count claims the marriage is unlawful. Well, what did they expect? A farmer's daughter bought at auction. The great bell tolled 9 times when the imperial messenger arrived, his horse's hooves clattering against the cobblestones. Clara's heart sank as she watched Wilhelm receive the sealed document in the courtyard. Even from above, she could see his shoulders tense as he broke the imperial seal. Within the hour, the decree's contents spread throughout the castle. Until the imperial court could investigate the validity of their marriage, Clara would hold no official status as princess. The whispers grew louder, bolder, as nobles passed her in the halls without even a pretense of courtesy. Back to the auction block, I suppose. One lady tittered behind her fan. Wilhelm found Clara in the library, where she had sought refuge among the dusty volumes. His face was drawn with worry and anger. "This is that snake Count von Rothbart's doing," he said, pacing before the fireplace. "He has always desired our lands. Now he seeks to destroy us through legal trickery." Before Clara could respond, the library doors burst open. The Dowager Duchess Hedwig swept in, her black silk gown rustling with disapproval. Her face was pale with fury. "You will end this farce immediately," she commanded Wilhelm, as if Clara were not even present. "Our family has ruled Altenburg for 300 years. I will not see it destroyed by your foolish infatuation with a peasant girl." Wilhelm's face reddened. "No." The dowager's voice cracked like a whip. "Renounce this. This auction bride, or forfeit your inheritance. I will not see our bloodline tainted. Choose now your crown or this common girl." Wilhelm's hands clenched into fists. "You cannot, I can, and I will." The dowager's eyes glittered coldly. "The law is clear. As Dowager Duchess, I have the power to name a new heir if you prove unfit. Your cousin Friedrich would be most grateful, I'm sure." Clara watched the color drain from Wilhelm's face. She knew what this meant. Without his inheritance, they would have nothing. No lands, no income, no protection. They would be cast out, reduced to poverty, and it would be her fault. "Wilhelm," she whispered, her voice trembling. Perhaps your mother is right. I bring you nothing but trouble. I am not fit to be a princess. I never was." "No." Wilhelm's voice was hoarse with emotion. "I will not hear such words from you." The dowager smiled thinly. "At least the girl shows sense. More than you, my son." She turned to leave, her skirts swishing. "You have until tomorrow to make your decision. Choose wisely." After she left, silence fell heavy in the library. Wilhelm stood at the window, his shoulders rigid with tension. Clara felt tears welling in her eyes. "I should never have let you marry me," she said softly. "Now you will lose everything because of me." Wilhelm turned suddenly, crossing the room in 3 swift strides. He knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. In the firelight, his eyes shone with fierce determination. "Listen to me," he said. "I would rather lose my crown than lose you. These nobles, with their cold hearts and empty titles, they are not worth your tears. If they cannot see your worth, then they are blind fools. But your inheritance means nothing without love." He squeezed her hands. "I swear to you, here and now, I will never abandon you. Even if we must leave Altenburg forever, even if we must live as common folk, I choose you, Clara. I will always choose you." Clara could not hold back her tears then. Fell freely. As Wilhelm drew her into his embrace, she wept for his sacrifice, for the uncertainty ahead, for the cruelty of those who would tear them apart. But mixed with her fear was a spark of hope, kindled by the strength of his love and the warmth of his arms around her. By the fire, they sat together, their shadows merging on the library wall, while outside the autumn wind whistled through the castle towers and carried away the last echoes of the harvest festival's joy. The imperial city of Vienna rose before them, its grand spires piercing the autumn sky. After 14 days of difficult travel over rutted roads, Wilhelm and Clara's carriage finally passed through the city gates. The streets were alive with activity, but as their carriage rolled past, conversations hushed and curious faces turned to stare. "There she is, the auction bride," Clara heard someone whisper. She drew back from the window, her cheeks burning. Wilhelm reached across to squeeze her hand. "Pay them no mind, my love," he said softly. "Their words cannot harm us." The whispers followed them through the crowded streets to the imperial palace, where guards in gleaming armor escorted them to their waiting chambers. That afternoon, they were summoned to the great hall where the emperor would hear their case. The vast chamber buzzed with excitement as nobles filled the gallery. Clara felt their stares like physical blows as she walked beside Wilhelm. Her simple blue dress, though well made, seemed shabby compared to the lady's elaborate silk gowns. Count Reinhard von Falkenhayn stood before the emperor's dais, resplendent in crimson and gold. His thin lips curved in a satisfied smile as he bowed deeply. "Your Imperial Majesty," he proclaimed, his voice carrying to every corner, "I present evidence that the so-called marriage between Prince Wilhelm and this common woman ... is null and void." He flourished a stack of documents. The auction itself was unlawful, conducted without proper license. Any contracts arising from it, including marriage, are therefore invalid. Titters of laughter rippled through the gallery. Clara's hands trembled as she clasped them tightly in her lap. "Furthermore," the Count continued, "such a union threatens the very foundations of noble society. If we allow commoners to purchase their way into royal families, I did not purchase her." Wilhelm's voice rang out as he surged to his feet. "I saved her from humiliation and found a heart more noble than any in this room." He turned to face the watching crowds. "You mock her common birth, yet she shows more grace, more kindness, more true nobility than those who claim it by blood alone." "Pretty words," the Count sneered, "but the law is clear. If I may speak," a new voice cut through the murmurs. Bishop Anselm rose from his seat, his weathered face grave. "I witnessed both the auction and the marriage that followed. Prince, Wilhelm acted not from whimsy or base desire, but from genuine compassion. I saw in his eyes that day what I see now, pure love and noble purpose." The bishop's calm words commanded attention. "As for the Lady Clara, I have observed her character these past months. She faces mockery with dignity, cruelty with kindness. Are these not the very virtues we claim to value in our nobility?" The emperor leaned forward on his throne, studying Clara thoughtfully. After a long moment, he spoke. "This requires careful consideration. I will give my judgment tomorrow at noon." He raised his hand, signaling the end of the audience. That night, in their chambers at an inn near the palace, Clara knelt before the small altar, her prayers a whispered litany in the candlelight. In the adjoining room, she could hear Wilhelm's boots on the floorboards as he paced back and forth, back and forth. Through the long, dark hours before dawn, the first rays of dawn painted the imperial square in soft, golden light. Despite the early hour, hundreds of common folk packed the cobblestones, their voices rising in a steady chant, "Justice for the people's princess." Servants who had traveled from Altenburg stood shoulder to shoulder with peasants from nearby villages, all united in their support of Clara. Inside the great hall, the emperor sat upon his throne as Wilhelm and Clara entered, their steps echoing. In the tense silence, the nobles gathered along the walls whispered behind jeweled fans, but their usual mockery faltered at the sound of the growing crowd outside. One by one, witnesses stepped forward. A bent old woman from Clara's village described how the new princess had nursed her through winter fever. A castle scullery maid, trembling but determined, spoke of Clara's daily kindnesses in the kitchen. A merchant recalled how she had defended his children from noble bullies in the marketplace. "She serves the people as a true princess should," declared a gruff farmer, his cap clutched in work-worn hands. With a heart of gold and hands not afraid of honest labor, the Count's supporters shifted uncomfortably as more stories poured forth. Tales of Clara's grace, her humility, her genuine care for all people, regardless of rank. Even some of the younger nobles began to look ashamed of their previous cruelty. The emperor raised his hand for silence. His stern gaze swept the hall before, settling on Wilhelm and Clara, who stood straight but humble before him. "We have heard much these past days," he proclaimed, his voice filling the vast chamber. "Of law and tradition, of rank and privilege. But we have also heard of something rarer, true nobility of spirit." He stood, commanding all attention. "We hereby declare this marriage valid and binding. Prince Wilhelm's right of succession stands firm, and we recognize Clara Weiss as Princess of Altenburg, with all rights and honors thereof." A collective gasp rippled through the court. Wilhelm, overcome with joy and gratitude, knelt before Clara and kissed her hand. Tears of happiness spilled down her cheeks as he rose to embrace her. The great doors swung open and trumpets blazed forth in celebration. Hand in hand, Wilhelm and Clara emerged into the sunlight. The crowd erupted in cheers, tossing flower petals and shouting blessings. Their love, tested by prejudice and strengthened by trial, had triumphed at last. Snow drifted like white feathers past the castle windows of Altenburg. Inside, warmth and laughter filled the great hall as villagers streamed through the doors, their arms laden with humble gifts for their beloved princess. Clara stood beside the massive hearth, accepting each offering with genuine delight: loaves of fresh bread, hand-knitted shawls, jars of preserved fruit. In the castle kitchens, an unprecedented sight unfolded. Clara had commanded the long wooden tables be set for all, nobles and servants alike. The aroma of roasting meat and fresh herbs filled the air as kitchen maids worked alongside ladies-in-waiting to prepare the feast. Some nobles bristled at first, but Clara's warm smile and gracious manner smoothed ruffled pride. "Come," she beckoned to a hesitant baroness. "Help me knead this dough. 'Tis most therapeutic, I assure you." Soon, flour-dusted fine silk sleeves alongside worn cotton ones, and shared laughter bridged ancient divides. The Dowager Duchess Hedwig observed from the doorway, her stern face softening as she watched her daughter-in-law move with natural grace between all levels of society. When Clara curtsied deeply before her, offering a perfectly baked sweet roll, the older woman's resistance finally crumbled. "You have proven yourself worthy of Altenburg," the dowager admitted quietly, taking Clara's flour-dusted hand in her own. "I was wrong to doubt you, my dear." Later, as the festivities wound down, Wilhelm found Clara in their private chambers. They sat together before the crackling fire, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the flames dance. "From auction block to throne," he mused, his voice tender. "What a journey we have made, my love." Clara leaned into his embrace, remembering the fear and shame of that autumn morning that seemed so long ago. Who would have thought that day would lead to such joy? The candlelight cast soft shadows as Wilhelm turned to face her, clasping her. Hands in his, "You've cured my loneliness," he whispered, his eyes bright with emotion. "You have brought warmth not just to my heart, but to all of Altenburg." Clara smiled, her heart full of quiet joy. The girl once mocked and scorned, now sat cherished and respected, truly the people's princess of Altenburg. In Wilhelm's loving gaze, she saw her own journey reflected from shame to triumph, from isolation to belonging, from fear to love. Thanks for taking a moment to feel with me. If this story reminded you of what matters, hit subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow, continuing our story.